Well, it's been a while since I've managed to do any kind of review video due to various things, like learning Monty passed away, learning Satoru Iwatawa died as well, and then several months of various personal troubles that culminated in my family losing a house that's been with us for 38 years. That kinda leaves you pretty drained from the kind of thinking you need to do to get any kind of review or overview done. Add in the fact that part of me has been very tempted to get into 3D work, it partly due to the inspiration of Monty, and I've kinda been running low on personal time here. Still, may as well push myself to get this little video done. I've been kinda looking forward to doing it. Looking at the Ace Combat games I've LP'd as a whole. First up in our list is Ace Combat 2, released in 1997 for the PlayStation 1. I couldn't really find an Ace Combat 1 here in the States. The closest thing I could see was an arcade game called Air Combat. Still, this is as good a place as any to start. The story is fairly simplistic. You are a pilot named Scarface. His only spoken dialogue is talking to ground control when landing, and the story is extremely bare bones. We have to fight rebels all over a fictional continent called Usia. The story doesn't get any real depth. It's essentially an arcade game, where they throw enemies at us and we have to shoot them down as they come. You've also got the fact that this game wasn't precisely translated, but it's easy to ignore that. Who cares about a few translation issues in a game that's around 3 hours with barely story at all? By the time you reach the 4th mission, you can get a wingman to help you in the action. One of 2 choices. But since you can only give them orders before the mission begins, it's probably better to fly alone, in my opinion. Now, back when I had a PlayStation 1, I didn't have a controller that had an analog stick. I just had the thumb pads to work with. And dear God, it doesn't matter how you try to control that thing. It is going to be jerky as hell and near impossible to control without a stick. Still, the missions are generally pretty short and aren't too challenging, even if you don't fly all that precisely. Only 6 out of the 21 missions I went through broke the 10-minute mark, though there are a number of alternate missions to take. Considering the fact that I saw them pay homage to the Death Star trench run at least 3 times in one game, there isn't a lot of variety, but still, it's a fun ride. None really seem any more tempting than the others when you're given the choice, though. The music's pretty upbeat and catchy, though only one tune felt particularly memorable to me. We also see the first signs of things that will be issues with the series for a long time. First off, the variety of fighter planes is appreciated, even if we have to buy our own aircraft for some reason. Really? We're fighting for you bastards, and we have to buy our own damn fighter jets? But anyway, there's not really enough to make you choose one or another due to style preferences. You're probably going to choose them based on what planes you think are cool, or whatever has stats that happen to be better than the other. And when you have 24 aircraft that have to fit the same combat roles in the same game, and some are more annoying to unlock than others, you're probably not going to play around with all of them. Especially since the later ones are definitely better in all the respects to whatever came before. The second problem is something that just irks you further you go into the series. It doesn't matter how good the graphics are or how beautiful the landscape might be. More often than not, you're looking at the sky, which doesn't really need much graphical work as the games go to more advanced systems. And we're fighting the enemy from a good distance away, so you're not gonna get a close look at them inside your little green target indicator. So get very used to the view you see here. It is not going to improve much from the PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 2 or to the Xbox 360. All that said, this is a very fun PlayStation 1 game, and certainly worth a look. Now, when Ace Combat 3 was released outside of Japan, a lot of the content was removed, while the Japanese audience got what some feel was the best installment of the series, with a very interesting plot, branching storylines, and some damn good cutscenes and voice acting. We got something with a very simplistic plot, only one mission path, all the cutscenes removed, and since I couldn't push myself to complete it, I didn't even bother trying to LP that version. There's a fan translation of the full version of the game that is, as of this post, halfway complete. When it's fully done, I'll probably take a look and eventually LP it for completion's sake, but for now, just figured I'd mention it so nobody thought I forgot about it. Ace Combat 4 was the first installment of the series to be released for the PlayStation 2, and the first installment I'm familiar with that actually tried to have an interesting running story. The local world was hit by an asteroid, and the country that took the brunt of the damage got their hands on a weapon capable of shooting down asteroids. Someone in that country got the bright idea that this could also be used as a very devastating anti-air weapon, and before long, they take over most of a continent. Now, unlike Ace 2, this one actually has a narrative. We hear the recollections of someone who was a child during this war, and who got to know our main rival, a man known only by Yellow 13. The man is very battle-hungry, caring only about facing a worthy opponent in the sky and protecting his squadron. We don't learn much about him, but to be fair, we're being told someone's recollection of him, not seeing him ourselves. It's a rather interesting perspective. Also interesting is the fact that unlike a lot of other games, we see as our main character, Mobius 1, gains a reputation as a very scary individual. I can't think of many games where you outright hear the enemy start talking about you specifically, with a sense of fear, feeling that against absolutely everyone else in your military they'd have a chance, but against you, they may as well just bring their own caskets. At the end, the enemy army is defeated. 2 massive anti-asteroid weapons are destroyed. We go through several trench runs in the final mission, and of course, our rival is dead. I would say may he rest in peace, but I get the feeling he'd be bored by that. Anyway, gameplay-wise, not much has changed since Ace 2. You've got an outright timer instead of a fuel gauge. PlayStation 2 controllers made 2 control sticks standard, so the controls feel smoother than they did when I had a more basic controller. My only complaint is the number of missions where we have to score a set number of points in order to win. Kind of a strange thing to introduce when we're trying to get away from the arcade game formula. Feels more like an arcadey gimmick than what we saw in the previous game. I know it's tough to really get a sense of a large-scale battle when you're flying around in a high-speed aircraft, and we want the player's actions to be very important for victory. But the way it's done makes it extremely hard to care for our allies. Their kills don't add to our score, and it's hard to tell just how well they're doing in a fight as a whole. We just rush from one target to the next, not paying any attention to our surroundings, at least until we accidentally smash into a wall or something, and colliding with absolutely anything can prove to be lethal. Hell, we can't even land on the wrong section of the runway without exploding. Overall, kind of a quirky game that not everyone would enjoy, but I like it, and think it's worth taking a look. Then came Ace Combat 5, and boy, did they try to get clever with this game's story. Unlike the previous game, we don't have any specific rival. What we're given is a small team to lead, yes. We actually have command authority over a small flight of fighter jets. Granted, the player character, call sign of Blaze, is probably going to do about 90% of the work, but the characters are done reasonably well and can be pretty enjoyable. Sure, they've got moments where they say things no soldier would ever say, anti-war and anti-military sorts of things. Yeah, in a game where you get to kick copious amounts of ass, you are flying in a small group of pacifists who decided to become fighter pilots. I'm probably less annoyed by that than other people because of a few reasons. First off, this game was made in Japan and was translated when it came to the United States. There are going to be some cultural differences in how the military is viewed. Secondly, this takes place in a fictional world in a war between two fictional countries. It's not like they're insulting actual soldiers. Now, after a certain point, the story shifts from your basic war tale with the occasional superweapon thrown in to something different. Spoiler alert for those who don't want to hear it. Skip over this image if you want the plot twist to catch you off guard if and when you try to emulate and or experience this game for yourself somehow. The war between the two countries has been manipulated by a third country that was defeated in a war 15 years ago, and they don't care which side wins. They just want both sides to be completely ravaged in the conflict. Yeah, where most war games just say, these two sides are fighting, you are on this side, go kick some ass! This one tries to get clever. Arguably too clever, but I appreciate the attempt at making a more interesting story. The missions are reasonably varied, though a few gimmicks are a real pain in the ass to deal with. For example, a mission where we have to time when we destroy radar facilities with the rest of our team. Once you get by the first part, the rest of the mission is pretty easy, but getting through it can be an exercise in frustration, since you're given a countdown for when the target should blow up, not when you should start opening fire. There's also a short little arcade mode, where we play as a main character from Ace Combat 4, good old Mobius 1, one last time in a series of short missions. All in all, a very fun installment to the series. Not sure if it's better or worse than Ace Combat 4, but you can certainly see signs of attempted growth at the very least. And now for the final Ace Combat game to be released on the PlayStation 2, my personal favorite installment of the series, Ace Combat Zero, a direct prequel to Ace Combat 5. I know, kind of weird to go from 5 to 0, but if that's the way they wanted to number it, who am I to complain? The war from 15 years ago that was mentioned in the first cutscene of 5 is where we're fighting this time, and if you're familiar with 5, you know how this war is going to end. Just because you know how the conflict is going to end doesn't mean you know how it's going to end for the main character, though, or precisely what's going to happen on the way to that end. It's a fairly solid story, narrated to us in cutscenes by a reporter who's compiling a documentary talking about the player character, Cypher. Probably the first time in a long time I've seen live actors in a game's cutscenes. I thought things like full motion video in games went out of style when Westwood died. One of his main sources of information is our wingman, Solo Wing Pixie, who I'd say is the best wingman in the series. He's cool and professional, but doesn't fall into the trap of being just another stoic guy who follows orders without a thought. And since he sticks with one pretty solid plane, when you start the game, he's causing about as much damage as a player, if not more. He earns your respect both on and off the battlefield, and you in turn earn his. There's a questionably done morality system that measures your honor. I can't help thinking their idea of a pragmatic, honorless asshole is not really that well done. kind of reminded me of Ultima 4's honor system, only with more questionably done details. I mean, really? So blowing up absolutely everything in a combat zone, including enemy aircraft that are for one reason or another withdrawing from the battlefield, is bad? I get avoiding civilian structures, but an enemy aircraft that's damaged and defenseless. Refusing to shoot those down isn't honor, it's being too lazy to deny the enemy potential resources in the future, or just too busy dealing with the various targets actively shooting at you to care. Ah, well. The whole honor thing determines what ace groups we fight against as the game goes on, and there's a good number of aces to fight in this game. If I've got any complaints about this game, though, it's that the last batch of missions feel kinda lackluster in comparison to the rest. Kind of a side effect of changing what enemy group we're fighting at the end. They just don't do enough to earn our respect, and are just there to pad things out before we duel an overpowered plane with some of the best music the series has ever pumped out going on in the background. There's also the fact that the super weapons we deal with feel inconsistently done, like a laser that changes what angle it comes at us when it's being fired from the same cannon, and we haven't moved nearly far enough away to alter its firing angle. I'm not saying this game is perfect, even if it is my favorite in the series. Even with all its flaws, though, this game really earns the title Ace Combat. You feel like a badass, and it's definitely worth a look. And then the series moved on to the Xbox 360, to Ace Combat 6. Maybe it's the fact that I enjoyed Ace Zero so much that this one felt more disappointing. Right from the first cutscene, we are lulled into boredom because the main narrator for the game is the unremarkable wife of a fighter pilot who has nothing going for her other than her daughter, who we don't get to see that much. Though the kid is awesome and inspirational. The cutscenes are poorly paced and sparsely populated. We have maybe 2 characters worth following in any way, one of whom is an enemy pilot who was crippled in the first mission and switched over to the intelligence division. The other is a little kid who manages to inspire her entire country. And yes, this is the daughter I mentioned earlier. We only get to see from one of their perspectives, and it's an intermittent thing. Everyone else is yawn-inducing. In a game where you're flying fighter jets, boredom should not be on the menu. Yeah. While our wingman, Shamrock, does get a few interesting moments, most of those are late in the game, and everything that isn't part of his little sub-story just doesn't make him any different from all the other pilots we fly alongside throughout the game. The gameplay? Well, it's not really different from the previous games, but this game decided to focus on as many large-scale battles as they could possibly shove in. Sure, the gimmick for large-scale battles has been improved to a point that it feels so much more fluid than in any of the other installments, but we go through so many that they stop feeling special. While the story is pretty solid, if questionably told at the start, it really starts to fall apart as it goes on. Dear God, it falls apart at the seams. If the invading army is invading because they've got economic troubles, how is it that they have a much, much larger and better funded military than the defenders? To the point that they can fortify more of the bases in what was our territory than our side could pull off. Period. And then there is the way that they built a goddamn wall around our capital city out of nowhere. Yeah. Sure, the other games had various plot holes and questionable moments, but this one feels like they want you to turn off your brain. Kind of forgettable, really. And unlike the earlier games, I can't think of any tunes in this one particular that really caught my attention. Still, As disappointing as this one is, it still feels like part of the same series as all the other games. It just feels like they fumbled the ball during the play. The next one, Ace Combat Assault Horizon, doesn't really feel like it's even the same series. Where all the others take place in a fictional world, this one is put in the real world, with real locations such as Dubai, Moscow, and Miami, and real militaries like NATO, generic Middle Eastern force that is somehow ridiculously well equipped, and we're never told what country we're actually fighting in, and generic Russian revolutionary force that isn't really given any goal other than widespread chaos. All the previous games, we played as a character who didn't have a reputation yet and was a rookie, a blank slate. This game, we're put in the shoes of Colonel Bishop. He isn't given any personal call sign as far as I know, just his name and squadron call sign, Warwolf 1. He's already built up his reputation before the game starts doing things we never got to see. His personality is pretty bland, too. God, this sort of main character makes the nameless, faceless, voiceless guys we've been in the previous installments feel better. Seriously, I'd rather be a blank slate than someone defined who feels like he's got less than 2 dimensions to his character. Our wingman in this one is even more forgettable than Shamrock, and the only thing I remember about this guy is I didn't like his call sign. I kind of associate it with a badass character, and this guy just doesn't measure up in any way. The core gameplay has gone through a number of changes in an attempt to try giving the series a new coat of paint. Part of the problem with the previous games, as I mentioned earlier, was the fact that they tended to look pretty much the same, regardless of what system they were put on. Most you see of the average enemies is a small, hard-to-see dot in a green box that turns red when you lock onto them. This game really makes sure you see plenty of close-up explosions, zooming in as you destroy plenty of targets. To the point the pretty explosions lose their meaning. The flow of each individual mission is kind of ruined when you have to wait several seconds for the next batch of enemies to pop up on your radar screen, whereas the previous games generally gave you a decent amount of targets to deal with, even if you aren't quite dealing with the next objective at the moment. They made the experience more cinematic with plenty of attention to visual detail, especially in the cutscenes, but that doesn't really matter if you don't care about any of the cast. There are a few other playable characters who aren't fighter pilots, but I came to this game hoping to be a fighter pilot. I wasn't expecting to be a helicopter pilot, and even if the mechanics of the helicopter fights are reasonably done, those missions generally feel overly long, and I wasn't here for that in the first place. I also wasn't expecting to be a helicopter gunner, or a bomber pilot, or an AC-130 gunner. Yes, we getting an AC-130. You can really tell this game took a good amount of inspiration from Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. Thing is, though, Call of Duty managed to make the AC-130 bit a fun change of pace. Assault Horizon makes it a one-shot pile of frustration. Really, the only section of the game that really catches my attention is the tail end, when a character that's been built up as our rival, Markov, finally gets a motivation. Apparently, his wife died when Americans bombed a country he was working undercover in, and he spends the final section of missions doing a suicide charge to hurt America. All well and good, but the execution could have been better, and we aren't given any reason why anyone would follow this guy, or why he was fighting earlier in the game. Where all the other games had at least one moment that draws on the Death Star trench run for inspiration, this game doesn't, and the super weapon that everyone's so afraid of is essentially a massive bomb that somehow doesn't cause any radiation like a nuke would. Excuse me for thinking that a country throwing around bombs capable of leveling cities in a few blasts would get hit by nukes in retaliation. It's not like it absolutely has to be a nuke strike that prompts the whole kill everything response. All in all, I might have had more fun with this game and been more willing to accept its flaws if it didn't have Ace Combat in the title. Trust me, I've tried to like it. I've looked at it from several angles. I've watched Angry Joe's fairly positive review of this game to try to get an idea of what people enjoyed with it, but I just can't see it. So, I've got to say, I'm pretty much done with the Ace Combat series. It's been a fun ride, and I will probably try out the fan translation of Ace Combat 3 when it comes out. But unless the newer games do something especially amazing that gets plenty of people talking, I won't care enough to buy anything more from them. So, for now, goodbye, Ace Combat. It was a pleasure to change the tide of so many wars in a fighter jet, but I'd say it's about time I traded my wings in. Hope those of you who've played the series before enjoyed this little overview, and those who haven't are inspired to find ways to experience the older games via emulators or used games. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to try to figure out how to actually use this 3D program.